Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. You are currently tuned in to the International Reparation Debate Competition for 2026. This is match number 12. That's right. We've witnessed 11 matches so far in round two of this competition, and there are two teams vying to secure one of only a few remaining spots in the rather octafinals of this competition. And I know they're going to do a wonderful, wonderful job. Of course, I'd like to welcome you again to the International Reparation Debate Competition, and I'd like to thank some really important people and institutions who would have made it possible for us to be here today. So I want to give and express thanks to the University of the West Indies, the Center for Reparation Research, UWI Press, Jade Limited, the University of Hull, and of course our main partner, the Repair Campaign. I am Ravon Thomas Matthews, and I'm going to be your chair judge for today. Now, joining me on my panel are two amazing adjudicators who will ask to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Jerome Reynolds.
Well, thank you, Ravon. So I guess I'm the first amazing adjudicator. My name is Jerome Reynolds, and I will be one of your wing adjudicators for this afternoon. Well, morning for some, afternoon for some. I just want to say thank you guys for making it, and I look forward to a wonderful and most exciting debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerome. And of course, Miss Jordana Denton.
Hi everyone, like Ravon said, my name is Jordina Denson and I will serve as one of your wing adjudicators. I look forward to an engaging match. All the best to both teams.
Thank you very much. And so we have amongst our ranks another amazing adjudicator, right? Mrs. Springer Barnett, who will be serving as a wing adjudicator and rather a guest judge. She is a research assistant from the University of the West Indies, Cayville, in the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. Miss Sarisa Springer Barnett, we invite you to introduce yourself.
Good morning. Well, good afternoon or good morning, all. It's a pleasure to be here, and I do look forward to some engaging conversations between the two teams.
All right, thank you so much. And so, ladies and gentlemen, these are the judges who will decide the outcome of this match. Now, who are the teams that are going to be debating? In proposition, we have Arima North Secondary School from Trinidad and Tobago. And from in opposition, we have, hailing from Jamaica, the Manchester High School. The motion before us reads, this House believes that academic research and reparation should be prioritized over mass public campaigning. Once more, this House believes that academic research and reparation should be prioritized over mass public campaigning. Now, let us hear from the two teams who will be debating today. We start with the team in proposition, Arima North Secondary.
Hi, good morning. My name is Justin Russell, and I will be your president for the proposition team this morning, or good this afternoon.
Hi, my name is Leandro Quintero, and I will be your Deputy Prime Minister for this afternoon's debate.
Hi, my name is Jada D'Souza, and I will be your third speaker for this debate.
Thank you very much. And we invite Team Manchester High School to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jerry Bryan, and I am the leader of opposition. Good morning, everyone. My name is Takira Edwards, and I am the deputy leader of opposition.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Thomas, and I'll be the third speaker of the opposition.
All right, and there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, your debaters for the day. Now, this competition is governed by what we call the Jade Parliamentary Debate format. And so this format will see the first two speakers speak for 7 minutes. The second speakers, you will have 6 minutes. The third and final speakers from each team, you will have 5 minutes to present your case. It's important to note that the first and last minute of each speech is considered protected time, in which no points of information will be allowed. Outside of protected time, points of information are not only allowed, but they are encouraged. Of course, during the reply speaker, we will not be allowing any points of information at all. Interestingly, to the Jade parliamentary format, we will have 2 periods of cross-examination, where the debaters will battle it out with their questions and answers. But fret not, I'll tell you more about the cross-examination when we get to that stage in the debate. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to officially call to order this match number 12 of the International Reparation Debate Competition for 2026. We invite the first speaker from Arima North Secondary School to open the case. The floor is yours, Josiah Russell.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, honorable judges, esteemed opponents, reparations are not a trend. Reparations are not a highlight, and reparations are most definitely not a temporary moment of public outrage. As historian Sir Hilary Beckles explains in Britain's Black Death, reparations represent the settlement of wealth that was deliberately extracted through historical injustice. In other words, reparations are a debt, and debts are not settled through emotion, they are settled through documented evidence. For clarification moving forward, Mr. Speaker, the following terms stand. According to the International Center for Transitional Justice, academic research involves truth-seeking, which refers to the systematic collection of archival evidence and foreseen calculations needed to establish responsibility and legal liability. Secondly, mass public campaigning, according to the social movement theory, is known as extra-institutional mobilization, which refers to collective actions outside formal institutions designed to pressure decision makers. Finally, the Cambridge Dictionary defines prioritizing as deciding which things are most important so that you can deal with them first. Prioritizing does not mean eliminating campaigning as an option, it means sequencing. Research must come first because it establishes legitimacy, credibility, and the legal foundation upon which any repertory claim must stand. Our burden today is simple. We must show that without a foundation of academic research, mass campaigning risks becoming ineffective, destabilized, and easily dismissed. To begin, Mr. Speaker, reparations require evidence. In courts, international negotiations, and diplomatic statements, claims succeed when they are supported by documented evidence and precise calculations of harm. Consider the reparations agreement between Germany and Israel after World War II, for example. The Luxembourg Agreement, with the Conference of Jewish Material Claims against Germany, was not achieved through slogans or public campaigning alone. It required detailed documentation of confiscated property, economic valuation of stolen assets, and legal recognition of state responsibility. Because the losses were calculated with precision, billions of dollars in reparations were paid. Germany did not pay simply because people were outraged, but instead, due to documented evidence, the claims were no longer undeniable. Now consider the danger of relying only on public campaigning. In today's digital age, one inaccurate statistic or exaggerated claim can allow governments to dismiss the entire movement as unreliable. Academic research acts as a shield, a protection against misinformation. Without that shield, movements risks losing credibility. And once that credibility is lost, justice becomes far harder to achieve. Subsequently, research creates fair and stable solutions. Mr. Speaker, in diverse societies like Trinidad and Tobago, reparations are complex. Different communities experience different historical injustices. For example, descendants of enslaved Africans endured chattel slavery, a system that erased identity, culture, and legal personhood. Secondly, descendants of indentured laborers experience contractual exploitation, wage theft, and systematic discrimination as extensively documented by historian Vernon Shepherd. Mass campaigning often simplifies injustice into a single narrative, but the thing is, justice cannot be simplified. Academic research allows for distributive precision, which refers to the ability to design remedies that accurately reflect the different historical harms experienced by different communities. We already see this practice through the Caribbean Reparations Commission, which has developed the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice. This plan outlines structured proposals including public health initiatives, educational development, technology transfer, and cultural restoration. Notice something important. This framework was developed by historians, economists, and legal scholars. Why, you may ask? Reason being, when former colonies negotiate with former colonial powers, they must speak the language of policy, law, and economics, not only protest. Without research guiding the process, reparations demand risks, creating conflict between communities competing for recognition. Research prevents the division by grounding justice in evidence rather than perception. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, research generates lasting justice. Reparations are not symbolic. They are legal and financial commitments that must survive changes in political leadership and public opinion. Mr. Speaker, our opponents may argue that campaigning is necessary to generate attention. While yes, we do agree, public awareness does matter, awareness without evidence cannot secure reparations. Campaigning may ignite a movement, but research is what wins that case. Prioritization is about order, not exclusion. You must first gather evidence before you file a case. You must first calculate your debt before you call a price. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, reparations are not acts of charity. They are debts grounded in documented historical harm. As shown, the work of the CARICOM Reparations Commission demonstrates that structured proposals command international respect. And history warns us that promises based solely on emotion rarely endure. You cannot build a house without a blueprint. Mass campaigning may express the desire for justice, but it is academic research that provides a blueprint that ensures that justice stands. If we truly want reparations to be paid, not merely promised, then research must come first. For these reasons, we proudly propose and firmly urge this House to support this motion. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was the first speaker from Arima North Secondary School, Josiah Russell. And now to open this debate for team opposition, we invite from Manchester High, Jerive Bryan.
In 3, 2, 1. Ladies, gentlemen, fellow members of the opposition, my competitors, right and honorable adjudicators, I extend unto you all a pleasant morning. The mood states that this House believes that academic research on reparations should be prioritized over mass public campaign. As the leader of the opposition, I unquestionably, definitely reject this motion. We sit here today not merely to debate policy, but to confront history. Reparations are not an abstract academic exercise. They are not theoretical frameworks awaiting perfect calibrations. Reparations are a question of justice. Justice delayed is justice denied. That. I will begin by defining our key terms. Academic research refers to systematic and scholarly investigations carried out by researchers, universities, historians, economists, and policy experts. In the context of reparations, it involves studying historical impacts of slavery and colonialism, calculating economic damages, examining legal frameworks, and proposing evidence-based models for compensation or restorative justice. Reparations are measures taken to repair harm caused by historical injustices such as slavery, colonial exploitation, and systematic discrimination. Prioritized means given greater importance, resources, and attention before other strategies. Mass public campaigning refers to organized efforts aimed at mobilizing large groups of people to support a cause. Importantly, the word over indicates comparison of priority. It does not necessarily mean eliminating one approach entirely, but rather choosing which strategy should be emphasized or considered more important in advancing the reparations movement. Firstly, we must recognize the urgency of justice. Reparations are moral imperative. For centuries, slavery, colonial exploitation, racial oppression generated enormous wealth for imperial powers while causing long-lasting economic, social, psychological harm to enslaved people and their descendants. Every year we delay action in the name of more research that allows injustice to continue. Moral injury does not fade with time, it deepens. When harm is done, we do not demand endless studies before acknowledging responsibility. We recognize wrongdoings and we pursue justice. The same principle should apply here. Secondly, historical evidence already exists. Why are we continuing to research? The brutality of the transatlantic slave trade and colonial exploitation is thoroughly documented through archive shipping records, plantation accounts, and government records. From the sugar plantations in the Caribbean to the wider colonial system, wealth was extracted from and invested into European development while formerly enslaved populations were left marginalized and under-resourced. Organizations such as CARICOM have already compiled strong legal and historical cases for reparations, including the 10-point action plan. The harm is documented. The economic impact is traceable. The responsibility is clear. More research is not needed to prove injustice. It only risks delaying action. Thirdly, accessibility and public engagement matters. Mass public campaigning reaches ordinary citizens. It educates the communities and builds awareness. Grassroots movements turn knowledge into collective pressure for change. Academic
Point of
research,
information.
no, while valuable, often remains confined to universities and scholarly journals, limiting its impact to the broader public. Reparations are not simply theoretical policy issues, they affect real communities that are still facing consequences of historical exploitation. Campaigning transforms awareness into political momentum. Fourthly, this is fundamentally moral. This is a fundamentally moral debate. It is not just a technical one. Governments often shift the conversation to technical questions: how much should be paid, who qualifies, what system should be used, and these questions are important, don't get me wrong. However, they come after we acknowledge the core principle that justice needs to be done. Before discussing the design of a bridge, we must all first agree that a river needs to be crossed. Fifth, the solutions already exist. Scholars and policymakers have proposed many reparation models, including direct compensation, educational investments, healthcare funding, debt relief, and institutional reforms. International laws and transitional justice frameworks have provided private cases. The problem is not a lack of ideas. The problem is lack of implementation. Ultimately, remember this: justice delayed is justice denied. Remember? We have the implementation, we have the legal framework, we have the economic analysis, we have the so private cases. What remains is the political will. Governance. Justice is not served by delay. Justice is served by decision. Reparations are not research projects awaiting completion. They are normal and moral obligations awaiting fulfillment.
Thank you very much. That was the first speaker from Manchester High School, Jereve Bryan. Now, my friends, I would have indicated to you a little treat that we have in store. That is the cross-examination period. We're at that stage in the debate. So, the cross-examination period flows as follows. Team opposition will first pose their questions to team proposition. They will have 3 questions. Each question will last 10 seconds, and each answer will last 45 seconds. It's important to note that for the team asking the questions, only one person on that team may do so at any given point in time. However, for the team that is answering the question, the entire team is permitted to do so as long as it falls within that 45-second period. After opposition has posed their 3 questions to proposition, and after proposition has answered them, we will flip the arrangement and allow proposition the same privilege. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, we start this first period of cross-examination when team in opposition poses their first question. Team Manchester High, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Good morning again, everyone. Proposition. Can you point to a single instance in history where a government voluntarily granted reparations purely because they were presented with a new academic paper rather than being forced by social honors?
Yes, we can. We have the Luxembourg Agreement of 1952 with the German conference, which was Germany against the Jewish. We also have the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya, where the government they conceded to reparations with $19.9 million and a formal apology after documentation was presented, structured and court-ready.
Second question, how do you prevent prioritizing research from becoming a convenient excuse for government to delay the reparation identity?
Could you repeat your question?
How do you prevent prioritizing research from becoming a convenient excuse for government to delay the reparation indefinitely?
Prioritizing research is not about delaying government reparations. The most disrespectful thing we can do to victims of historical injustice is rush a weak case that collapses in court. A fast rejection helps no one. Prioritizing research helps increase the likelihood that when justice comes, it is enforceable, durable, and cannot be overturned.
Third question.
If we prioritize research for another 10 years and during that time of the last remaining direct descendants of slavery pass away, has your priority served justice or help the state avoid its debt?
We are not saying ignore urgent issues. We are saying that research should guide action. Acting without evidence can lead to ineffective solutions or waste resources. Even quickly, primarily, research can help ensure that right action is taken.
All right. Thank you very much. That was indeed the first half of the first period of cross-examination. At this point in time, we now invite Arima North Secondary School to pose their questions to Manchester High.
First question. With your model of prioritizing campaign splits, if your campaign gains momentum around a certain expectation, and later, when you conduct research, it contradicts that expectation, how do you prevent backlash and loss of trust?
Can you please repeat?
Sorry?
Can you please repeat your question?
Sure. With your model of prioritizing campaigning first, if your campaign gains momentum around a certain expectation, and later, when you conduct research, it contradicts that expectation, how do you prevent backlash or loss of trust?
Your answer?
Justice is
Go ahead.
Justice is rarely achieved through comfortable consensus. It is achieved through confrontation. That is, we require, we believe that since there is a pre-existing knowledge of the whole concept of slavery and reparations, everyone who is involved in mass campaigning should already have that information.
Given limited resources, why prioritize mobilization before confirming feasibility through research?
Could you repeat the question, please? I'm sorry.
Given limited resources, why prioritize mobilization before confirming feasibility through research?
We stand the point that we have enough information. We have collected the adequate information for feasibility, for mobilization, and we now, rather than continue research, because we have that century of knowledge already, it is now time to prioritize mass campaigning because we have that information. So now, rather than continue research, we want to move forward public campaigning, and we understand that information is important, but we have enough information. We should continue now public campaigning and making the masses understand the importance of reparations.
And to add on to that, history clearly shows that legal strength is often ignored until a movement is shown.
Okay, following up on that question then. If a government,
We didn't ask your question, right?
no, second. Can we continue?
Yeah, man. This is your next question. Your third.
Following up on that question, if a government agrees in principle due to the public pressure from campaigning, but later retracts based on insufficient data when research is connected, and you claim that research has already been conducted, how does your sequencing prevent that reversal?
Could you please repeat your question?
Of course. If a government agrees in principle due to public pressure from your campaigning, but later retracts this based on insufficient data from the research that has already been conducted, with your claim that enough research has been done, how does your sequencing prevent that reversal?
Okay, so judges do not operate in a vacuum. Legal precedents, like you mentioned, the 2013 Mama settlement, only reach the courtroom when a global campaign creates a reputational crisis for the defendant. We are prioritizing campaign to ensure that reparations are charged through.
And what is truly unsustainable is research fatigue, waiting over 200 years for a study that leads to no action at all.
All right, thank you very much to both teams. That was the first period of cross-examination. Now, at this point in time, we're going to invite the second speaker from Arima North Secondary School, Leandra Quintero, to extend the debate for side proposition.
May I begin?
Ready when you are.
The opposition will stand here today and tell you that justice delayed is justice denied. That we must move now, march now, shout now. But we on the proposition ask a harder question. What happens when you move without a map? Firstly, to prioritize is not to eliminate. We are not arguing against campaigning, but prioritization asks the strategic question. When resources are limited, do we build the foundation first or amplify the noise? My partner has already established that reparations are a legal and moral debt. Today, I will suggest three things. Without research, trauma gets diluted. Without research, reparations collapse structurally. Without research, victims lose credibility in negotiation rooms that decide their future. Let us be very clear. Campaigning without research turns atrocities into allegations. Take the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. Thousands were detained, tortured, and abused under British colonial rule. Survivors campaigned for over 50 years. 50. But what did the British government say? Unverifiable, lost to time, no records. Why? Because there was no documented, structured, and court-ready body of research. It was not louder protests that broke the case open. It was an archival excavation. Harvard historian Caroline Elkins uncovered the Hanslope Park Duck archives, documents the British government had hidden. She cross-referenced them with survivor testimonies to create what courts required, corroboration. And suddenly, in 2011, the British High Court could not dismiss it. $19.9 million and a formal apology. Not because people shouted louder, but because the evidence became undeniable. Campaigning created the will, but research created the way. If you want reparations to last longer than a news cycle, you need infrastructure. After the Holocaust, there was no template for reparations. None. Entire families erased, property scattered across continents. If they had relied on mass campaigning alone, what would have happened? A symbolic payout, a headline, a handshake, and then what? Silence? Instead, economists and legal scholars did something revolutionary. They calculated loss. They mapped stolen property. They created legal frameworks for heirless assets. They drafted the Luxembourg Agreement of 1952 based on economic precision, not emotional urgency. And because of that, payments have continued for over 70 years. Over $90 billion distributed to date. And that is the result of prioritizing research. But let's look at what happens when research is not prioritized. The Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921. A wealthy Black neighborhood. Black Wall Street burned to the ground. Hundreds killed. For 80 years, silence. Why? Not because the trauma did not happen, but because there was no official documentation, no forensic mapping, and no confirmed death toll. Survivors went to court, of course, but they were dismissed. Because where was your evidence? They were told their losses were untracked. Sorry?
Point of information.
Go ahead.
If centuries of slavery and colonial exploitation aren't enough evidence for the moot, what exactly are you still looking for?
There was no documented court-ready body of research. If we had the research, maybe when they went to court, they would not have been dismissed. Survivors went to court, of course, but they were dismissed. Why? They were told their losses were untrackable, their graves were unproven, and the damage was unclear. Campaigning existed, pain existed, memory existed. But courts do not rule on memory, they rule on evidence. It was only decades later, when archaeologists used ground-penetrating radars, that mass graves were confirmed. But by then, most survivors had passed away. If we truly want justice to be served, research must be prioritized. We do not want symbolic victories designed for headlines. We want systemic victories that survive cross-examination. Campaigning is powerful. It mobilizes. It unites. It educates. But if you walk into a courtroom, a negotiation table, or an international tribunal without research, you are walking in empty-handed. Victory is not volume. Emotion is not evidence. And urgency without structure is vulnerability. If we truly respect victims of historical injustice, we do not hand them megaphones first. We hand them documentation. For justice that is enforceable, sustainable, and credible, academic research must be prioritized. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was the second speaker from Arima North Secondary School, Leandra Quintero. At this point in time, we invite the second speaker from Manchester High School, Tahira Edwards.
I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I begin, let me make one thing abundantly clear. We are not here to eradicate academic research. No, what we are saying is that for far too long, we have settled for education that remains stagnant, locked inside classrooms and buried in textbooks that barely if ever make it past those four walls to actually push for peer. We don't need to invest in more research than necessary just for it to sit on a shelf. We need the research we already have to be put into the hands of the people to demand a result. All protocols observed a pleasant morning to you all. There has never been a moment in history where power surrendered its privilege because it was presented with a well-formatted research paper. Where there is demand, there is concession. And that brings me to my first point: campaigning builds the pressure that research could never. Many people dismiss mass campaigning as nothing more than empty barrels making noise, but that is the furthest thing from the truth. The truth is in the saying, united we stand, divided we fall. When people work in solidarity, it isn't just about being loud, it's about being effective. They stand together because they know that individual voices can be ignored, but a unified movement is a force that cannot be silenced. Let us take, for example, when research is not prioritized. One of the most well-known movements across the globe, Black Lives Matter. For decades, activists and scholars wrote papers about systematic inequality and the need for repair, yet those papers gathered dust on the shelves of policymakers. The moment that research was taken out of the classroom and turned into a global campaign, the pressure became undeniable. Because of the solidarity on the streets, we saw institutions that had been silenced for centuries start to move. The University of Glasgow committed to a 20 million euros reparative justice program, and the Church of England established a 100 million euros fund to address its ties to chattel slavery. We can all go to school and learn the same dates and the same facts, but history proves that a classroom rarely creates a conscience. Research is a whisper, but a campaign is a shout. Without the campaign, the world remains indifferent and ignorant. We prioritize campaigning because we know that while an educated researcher can write a report on an educated mass, only an educated mass can demand a revolution. This is the result of focusing on what actually works. Mass public campaigning. My second point is that victims' voices matter. One of the greatest dangers in prioritizing academic research is that it silences or sidelines the lived experiences of those who were direct victims of slavery and its effect. Research often treats our ancestors' trauma as a data point to be analyzed by experts behind closed doors, but campaigning centers the movement on the people who actually lived the struggle. We see the sidelining in the history of the Moyne Commission. When the British sent researchers to the Caribbean in 1938, the experts spent their time talking to the colonial officials and wealthy landowners. The actual workers, the ones in the sugar fields and the ones starving in squalor, were treated as subjects to be studied. When we prioritize public campaigning, we refuse to let our history be altered. It allows the great grandmothers who remember the stories of their youth to feel the weight of, who feel the weight of systematic poverty to speak their own truth. We prioritize campaigning because justice isn't a theory to be discussed by academics. Thirdly, political realities. We live in a world where policymakers do not respond to the weight of a well-researched paper, but instead to the weight of public opinion and the threat of public action. Retrospect to the 1823 Demerara Rebellion in Guyana. Over 10,000 enslaved people rose up in a radical, massive campaign. Even though the rebellion was brutally suppressed, the pressure it placed on the British Parliament was so intense that it accelerated the entire abolition movement. Sorry?
Point of information.
We also see this with the French Revolution. It didn't matter how many pro-slavery research papers were published in London, the political reality had changed because the people in the colonies had made the system a political liability. We see the same reality today with the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparative justice that my Deputy Prime Minister Leader of Opposition Jerry Bryan mentioned. Yes, it is research, but this plan didn't gain international traction just because CARICOM found new information. It gained traction because it was backed by the collective political will of the Caribbean diaspora and a global campaign for justice. When the public stands behind a plan, it becomes a mandate. Policymakers only sit at the table when they realize the public has already left the room and is standing at the gate. We prioritize campaigning because we know that in politics, 1,000 voices in the street are worth more than 1,000 pages in the library. We are not here to study the debt, we are here to collect it. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was Tahira Edwards from Manchester High School. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we dive back into the second period of cross-examination. The rules remain largely the same, except this time we will invite Arima North Secondary School to pose their questions first.
If political leaders respond to campaigning pressure before research is finalized, how do you ensure that those promises address the true severity of historical injustice rather than just be symbolic?
Our prioritizing mass campaigning now is a movement going on continuously. We want to move on now. We have the research, centuries of research. We know there have been hundreds of experts doing the research. We have the research. What we need now is campaigning. And it will not be symbolic. It will get the reparations needed.
Reparations require administrative bodies to process claims. At what stage in your model is that infrastructure designed?
Thank you. Governments already have models. CARICOM Reparation Commission has outlined a 10-point plan, including debt cancellation, technological transfer, and education funding. Globally, Germany paid reparations and South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
What safeguard prevents your movement from promising outcomes that later research cannot substantiate?
Can you repeat that?
What safeguards prevent your movement from promising outcomes that later research cannot substantiate, or research that currently exists cannot substantiate?
The research we have, as was said several times before, proven in our speeches, is enough. It is more than enough. The research science, the research is very unlikely to change. It is proven that we have the research. What we need now, as was said before, is the campaign. The research is not the problem at this stage. It was never the problem. Now the problem is the campaign. We have the research.
And it is far more dangerous to wait. We have waited for a lot of centuries. Campaigning ensures urgency, which is the only way justice can be delivered in this economy.
All right, thank you very much. Those were the 3 questions from Arima North Secondary. We now invite Manchester High School's 3 questions.
Thank you. Do you accept that prioritizing research risks indefinite postponement and that justice delayed is justice denied?
Can you repeat your question, please?
Do you accept that prioritizing research risks indefinite postponement and that justice delayed is justice denied?
No, we do not agree with that statement, as campaigning without research may be faster, but it risks being ineffective. Research saves times in the long run because it ensures campaignings are focused, accurate, and solution-oriented. It prevents misdirection.
Movements also collapse when they cannot answer basic policy questions that research provides.
Okay, next question. How do you reconcile prioritizing research with the democratic principle that change should be driven by the people?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
How do you reconcile prioritizing research with the democratic principle that change should be driven by the people?
Reparations are for the people. Research only ensures that reparations are legally enforceable. Reparations, by definition, are to restore historical injustice. We are for the people. We are just ensuring that research is legally enforceable and fully addresses the severity of historical injustices.
Third question, how does academic research locked in journals reach ordinary citizens compared to mass campaigning?
We don't deny the use of mass campaigning, but research is needed for courts and governments and international tribunals. Mass campaigning gathers the people and raises awareness. But in order for research to even be effective in courts, we need academic research.
No, for campaigning.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes this second period of cross-examination. At this point in time in the debate, we're going to pause for 1 minute. The only two speeches remaining are the reply speakers. Both speakers are going to do their very best to prove to us why they think their team has won the debate. To aid them in that mission, we will provide them a 1 minute pause so that they can conclude their reply speeches. That 1 minute break starts now.
All right, that is time.
All right, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude this debate for Manchester High School, we invite their third and final speaker, Kishan Thomas.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Esteemed adjudicators, fellow debaters, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As the opposition replies, Speaker, my duty is to crystallize this debate, dismantle the government's case, and show why the opposition stance must prevail and why we clearly want this debate competition. The move before us states that this House believes that academic research on reparation should be prioritized over a mass public campaign. The government members argue that prioritizing academic research and delayed documentation ensures reparations are grounded in evidence and avoid rash campaigning. But this argument collapses. Delaying injustice, prioritizing research risk, indefinite postponement. As our first speaker says, justice delayed is justice denied. Victims cannot wait until century for further study. Ladies and gentlemen, let us take a step back. Reparations are not an abstract academic exercise. They are about justice, dignity, and restoration of humanity. The government wants us to believe that more research must come first. But the truth is, the research has already been done, the harm has already been proved proven and the debt has already been calculated. Between 10 and 12 million Africans were forcibly transported across the transatlantic slave trade. Millions more died in transit and were born in bondage. This is not speculation, it is documented facts. The United Nations has declared slavery and transatlantic slavery as a crime to humanity. Scholars like Sir Buckley in Britain's Black Death has proven that Britain's Industrial Revolution was financed by Caribbean slave labor. Beckles estimated that the Caribbean is owed trillions of dollars in reparations. This is not a matter of needing more studies, it is a matter of governments refusing to pay. Reparations are not unprecedented. Germany has paid over 70 million euros to Holocaust survivors and their descendants. In South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission combined research with public advocacy to achieve healing. These examples prove to us that reparations are possible when campaigning forces governments to act. CARICOM's Reparation Commission has placed reparations on the global agenda, but it was not research alone that achieved this. It was public campaigning, advocacy, and political mobilization. The government case offers scholarship without urgency, evidence without accessibility, and justice without action. Our team has spoken with one voice and have spoken well. My first speaker, Ms. Bryan, shows that urgency of justice, the sufficiency of existing research, and the moral imperative of reparations. The second speaker, Ms. Edwards, demonstrates how campaigning builds pressure, creates awareness, and carries symbolic importance. Together, our case is cohesive. Research informs, but campaigning transforms. The government says we need more knowledge. We say knowledge is abundant. What is lacking is political will. Campaigning generates that will. The motion asks what should be prioritized. The government prioritizes research, but that risks paralysis. We prioritize campaigning because it ensures that research is heard, acted upon, and translated into reparatory justice. Now, let us tie in the moral imperative. The Bible commands us in Isaiah 1 verse 17, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, defend the fatherless, and plead the widow's case. No, this verse is not about passive study. It is about active pursuit of justice. Campaigning embodies this divine mandate. It is the collective cry. So, why does the opposition reign victorious? Because we have shown 1, justice is urgent, 2, evidence already exists, 3, campaigning builds pressure, 4, victim voices matter, and 5, global presidents prove success. And why does the government lose? Because their case is built on delay, detachment, and denial. They offer scholarship without urgency, evidence without accessibility, and justice without action. They want us to wait for more studies while victims continue to suffer. Ladies and gentlemen, reparations are not won in libraries. They are won in movements. They are won when the oppressed rise, when the world hears their cry, and when the governments are forced to act. The government case leaves victims waiting. The opposition case will deliver justice. This is why the House must reject this motion before us. Case closed. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Kishan Thomas from Manchester High School. And now, to conclude this debate, we invite Arima North Secondary School final speaker, Jadel De Souza, to conclude this competition.
This debate ultimately comes down to one question. What exactly secures reparations? Visibility or enforceability? The opposition's strongest claim is that mass campaigning creates urgency, and urgency forces governments to act. This may sound persuasive at first, but it collapses for these 3 reasons. First, governments respond to liability, not volume. As our first speaker showed, remedies require institutional processing and legal oversight. That means documentation, verification, and structured claims. Second, history disproves their model. The 1952 Luxembourg Agreement did not succeed because protests were louder. It succeeded because economists calculated losses and created a legally binding framework. Similarly, in Kenya, the Mau Mau settlement only materialized after evidence forced legal acknowledgement, not because demonstrations intensified. Research creates legitimacy, and legitimacy is what translates into policy, payment, and permanence. Third, pressure without proof is reversible. History is filled with promises made in moments of political heat and withdrawn once attention fades. But reparations are not settled in rallies. They are settled in negotiation rooms and diplomatic forums. And in those spaces, the questions are always the same. Where is the evidence? The opposition argues that prioritizing research delays justice, but this must understand how justice works. Justice delayed is tragic, but justice denied because it lacks evidence is permanent. Look at the Tulsa race massacre. Survivors were dismissed for decades because losses were labeled unverified. Campaigning existed, but enforceable proof did not. And courts rejected the absence of documentation. Academic research is not a delay mechanism. It is a protection mechanism. Research allows us to draft remedies that are legally coherent and socially stable. With the aid of academic research, the CARICOM Reparations Commission developed the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice, which outlines structured proposals. This plan shows that research has started, but starting is not the same as securing a legally binding agreement. The opposition claimed that information is enough, and that is why the Caribbean has not been securing reparations. This is why research must remain the priority, so that when action is taken, it leads to enforceable results. We accept that campaigning raises awareness, but it still does not outweigh our case. Awareness without structure produces symbolic gestures, a temporary fix. Nothing in the opposition speech dismantled our core mechanisms. 1, reparations require institutional validation. 2, precision prevents social division. 3, legal permanence protects victims long-term. They have not shown how mass public campaigning produces enforceable settlements. They have not shown how urgency substitutes for evidence. They have not shown how visibility guarantees payment. The opposition prioritizes mobilization first and structure later, hoping momentum survives long enough to matter. We, the proposition, prioritize academic research, which ensures that when demands are made, we cannot be dismissed. If you care about justice that is enforceable, durable, and internationally credible, the ballot is clear. Prioritize academic research. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That concludes, ladies and gentlemen, this match of the International Reparation Debate Competition for 2026. At this point in time, the judges are going to excuse themselves to another space and return to you shortly with the results of this match.
Good
Good morning, judges. Today, we stand with one goal: justice.
Reparations repair the harm caused by slavery and colonialism.
They help us face the past and fix inequalities we still see today.
Reparations can rebuild trust and bring healing to our people.
They create better access for education, healthcare, and opportunities across the Caribbean.
Join us as we will debate for fairness, progress, and a better future.
I am Gary Wu from the Manchester High School, and this is why reparations are important. Firstly, a reparation is an effort to repair damage, whether it is caused by historical injustice by people or by countries. Reparations are important because it helps with acknowledgement of injustice, it helps with social healing and prevention. Acknowledgement means that reparations are there to formally recognize that a serious wrong or an offense has been committed. It helps with social healing because it fosters a sense or an environment of understanding and accountability, and it helps bring back relationships between countries or communities. And it helps with prevention because once a consequence has been given to that injustice, it will prevent future behavior to happen. Thank you.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this International Reparation Debate Competition. This International Reparation Debate Competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparations so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional / international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Education about the history of the oppression of a people can either be a tool for liberation or a tool for reinforcing trauma. What allows for education to be one or the other is not the topics taught, but how they are delivered. Therefore, we, the proposition, would like to firmly state that teaching the history of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, or TTEA for short, does significantly more harm than good, not because of the topic, but because of the current pedagogical approach taken. Your average high schooler learns about the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans through a rigid, standardized curriculum. They are taught by a teacher who is expected to simply deliver information, often in a lecture format, and test students on their ability to memorize facts, years, and names. In this setting, students are not invited to engage critically with the material, ask difficult questions, or relate the content to their own lived experiences. Instead, they passively receive a version of history unable to truly process its relevance, impact, or emotional weight. Where is the opportunity to understand how this horror shaped the blood in our veins and the names we carry? There is none. Students memorize facts and regurgitate them on paper. But inside, the lesson lingers, that the history of the African diaspora is one of subjugation, and that their place in the world is to suffer and survive, not to lead, not to thrive. This is exactly what Paulo Freire, in his work The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, described as the banking method of education, where students are treated as empty accounts to be filled by the teacher. Freire believed this model was fundamentally oppressive because it prevents learners from becoming active participants in their own liberation. It discourages dialogue, reflection, and consciousness raising. This is what he calls conscientization. The teaching of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans today in many classrooms still follows this harmful pattern. When this topic is taught in a banking method that assumes dichotomy between human beings and the world they live in, Freire says an individual is a spectator rather than a recreator. This kind of teaching doesn't empower, it conditions students to fit into a world shaped by oppression rather than resist it. And that is why we say it does more harm than good, because it teaches history in a way that keeps students passive, not engaged. We learn about Oladoye Ekiano, we learn his name, we learn that he experienced this and he wrote an account, but do we open the book and study it and analyze it and discuss it with our teachers the way that Israeli schools discuss Elie Wiesel's Night of the Holocaust? The opposition says they want students to learn about the slave trade and the enslavement of a people. And of course, we all want all students across the world to have reverence for this grave and absolutely horrific period of history. And we do this with the intention that learning about it can empower them to challenge the lingering legacies of racism and inequality. However, defending the status quo, which our opposition seeks to uphold and claims offers us more good than harm, will not offer us this. This is not remembrance. This is not reverence. And when you trace the system back to its roots, you realize that this is not our system at all. Accepted.
The fact that students today are not listening about the brutality, but also about the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies, creating empowerment more than harm.
Right. Our issue is not with these topics being taught, but it is the way that they are taught and the way that they are emphasized with regards to all of the other things that are occurring within African history. To continue, our education system was inherited from Britain, a colonial power that had no interest in nurturing Caribbean identity or liberation. And what good can we expect from teaching this topic when we are continuing to do so in England's pedagogical approach? Even worse, as you mentioned, African history is taught in the Americas and Europe as though it began with slavery. From primary school, students are introduced to African people not through the glory of their kingdoms, their intellectual traditions, or their achievements, but through their chains. Why is it so hard for you to name a single black figure whose legacy is not defined by resistance or white oppression? Why is it that we teach about Toussaint and Nani, but not Imhotep, Mansa Musa, or Queen Nzinga in the same breath? This should be taught first. And compare this to how the Holocaust is taught in Israeli. This is taken from the Israeli Ministry of Education.
Point of information.
Declined. Children are introduced to the brilliance of their culture first, their thinkers, their faith, and their resilience before they are taught about genocide. Their oppression is contextualized within a legacy of strength, not as the first chapter. If that isn't a pedagogical problem, then what is? When slavery is taught primarily as a story of powerlessness and victimization, with the current banking method of pedagogy, it does more than inform. It deeply affects the psychological development of students, particularly those of the African diaspora. During adolescence, a critical time for identity formation, as described in Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, students are particularly vulnerable to internalizing messages about their race and their place in history. If the dominant narratives they encounter emphasize subjugation or this constant need to fight without also highlighting pre-colonial civilizations and agency, students may inherit a sense of trauma and inferiority. Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson's 1995 concept of stereotype threat shows that students underperform when they fear confirming negative stereotypes about their group, a common experience for Black students navigating a curriculum saturated with ancestral suffering. In classrooms where Black students only encounter these narratives and are rarely offered examples of greatness before colonial times, they are more likely to fear confirming negative stereotypes about Black intellectual inferiority. And yes, this study found that this did significantly reduce their academic performance. In contrast, we argue for emancipatory pedagogy, which views students as active co-creators of knowledge and encourages reflection, dialogue, and transformation. We want students to read and discuss the first accounts, and this should be a mandatory part of the curriculum, not an option. Additionally, students should be first met with pre-colonial history that showcases the richness and strength of Africans from various tribes and kingdoms before delving into the horrors of the slave trade. Through student-centered dialogic approaches, this topic becomes not a detached narrative of victimhood, but a pathway to critical consciousness where students develop an internal locus of control, a sense of pride, and the tools to challenge injustice. When classrooms prioritize empathy, voice, and critical inquiry over memorization, the teaching of the TTEA can become what Freire calls a practice of freedom, not oppression. We are fully justified in arguing that teaching the history of the TTEA causes more harm than good on the basis of the heavily flawed pedagogy. In parliamentary debate, motions like this are evaluated based on the status quo, meaning how things are actually occurring now. As such, the opposition cannot shift the debate by suggesting that in some ideal future it could be taught differently or argue on the basis of the principle. We are debating the present, and the burden is to defend the way that it is taught now. Thank you.
All protocols observed, the opposition remains resolute against the motion. This House believes that the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans causes more harm than good. We in the opposition agree that there are flaws in the method, but we argue that even in its current form, teaching this history does far more good than harm. We accept the definitions posited by the opposition with the exception of the word harm. Harm caused by the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans in this case is more like temporary discomfort that fosters long-term justice awareness and healing. The proposition burden is to prove that the act of teaching this history is inherently harmful, even when taught well, and that these harms are so deep and widespread that they outweigh all educational and social benefits. We must prove that the current approach generates more harm than good, and 2, the harm is not inherent to the method but as a result of poor implementation, and 3, that the teaching of enslaved Africans creates civic awareness, empathy, prevention of recurrence, and general social progress. The status quo, the history of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans is already being taught, but with growing care and impact. Students today are learning not just about the brutality, but also the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies of inequality. Yes, some schools get it wrong. Reform is being done for more inclusive, trauma-informed, and empowering education, making it the norm. Mr. Speaker, we are not for the current way of teaching this history. The motion didn't state the current way. We are for the best way of teaching this history. Allow me to rebut. And this best way is trauma-informed teaching. This would be training teachers to handle emotional topics with care, no graphic reenactment, use check-ins, and create safe spaces. This builds resilience instead of re-traumatizing students. And 2, balancing the story. Don't stop at brutality. Teach about African civilization, resistance leaders like Nani of the Maroons, and achievements of the African diaspora that restores pride and identity. 3, we would center real voices, use first-hand accounts, African scholars, and cultural sources to humanize the content and shift away from cold textbook trauma and link the past to the present, which will let students reflect through debate, which is already being done, and modern connections to racism and justice. This transforms discomfort into action and purpose, including Black educators. Involve Black voices in teaching is as authenticity, prevents tone deafness, and build trust. in diverse classrooms. This is credible as the RUN program has a similar approach, and it has proven to be working, as it has a 94% increase in the racial unity and empowerment. Allow me to rebut the misconceptions provided by the government. The government stated that teaching of trafficking of enslaved African causes discomfort and psychological harm. But let me say that discomfort is not harm, Mr. Speaker. And the 2019 UNESCO states that students taught slavery alongside resistance have greater empathy and understanding of justice. And secondly, discomfort is necessary for growth and historical reckoning, just like the Holocaust education or genocide studies. They also stated that the current method does not include the history before slavery. But Mr. Speaker, let me say that this is a big misconception. Most syllabi incorporates the history of the Africans before they were colonized. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Mansa Musa. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Songhai Empire. It is in the rationale also
Point of information
that the teachers should use discussions to actually engage the students. In today's debate, I will bring two substantive. One, the current methods build civic awareness, empathy, and critical thinking. And two, discomfort from learning is not the same as harm. It leads to empowerment. My second speaker will discuss justice and the prevention of repetition in the injustice, while my third speaker will prove why we remain supreme. Our first substantive is the harm lies in the method, not the content. My first warrant is balanced teaching that includes stories of resistance and survival, reduces emotional harm and builds empathy. When we emphasize both suffering and human dignity in the trafficking of enslaved Africans by teaching resistance, African agency and survival, we shift from trauma to empowerment. It does more harm than good because it builds pride, resilience, and understanding. For example, the Holocaust education isn't taught by showing only images of death camps. They come with stories of resistance, survival, and moral courage. It fosters pride, empathy, and moral courage instead of guilt or division. That's why balanced, trauma-informed teaching benefits are supreme. My second warrant is effective, safe teaching already exists and work. We're seeing programs like Facing History and Ourselves offer concrete evidence that teaching hard history can be both emotionally and safe, intellectually enriching. According to a 2021 RUN Corporation study, students in these programs which is a reform program by the way, show that 94% increase in civic agency, meaning they felt more empowered to take social action and reported deeper empathy, stronger historical understanding, and more open-minded attitude. And the fact that we're seeing this in real classroom, Mr. Speaker, proves that harm is not inherent to the topic. It's about how we design the curriculum and support teachers, and we are currently doing this now through reform. If we have models that work, and we do, then the moral burden shifts to improving delivery, not erasing the content. What my third warrant is suppressing this history causes more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, be aware that we're not talking just about the current history. We're talking about the teaching of the history overall, because that's what the mood says. In environments where slavery is ignored or downplayed, misinformation spreads like wildfire. Students grow up believing that slavery was minor, that racism is just a mere relic of the past, or that systemic inequality is simply an overreaction. This ignorance sustains real-world harm, and contrary to this, we're seeing that countries like Germany, who have faced their history head-on with regards to the Holocaust, show lower levels of historical denialism and far-right extremism than those that whitewash. The impact, it promotes social equity and activism, because when students learn this history accurately and empathetically, they become more socially aware, engaged, and ready to challenge injustice. And two, it empowers empathetic, informed citizens who are empowered to fight modern injustice. And three, it protects future generations from repeating injustice. My second substantive is silence enables racism to thrive. My first warrant is when schools avoid teaching slavery, they leave students with distorted or incomplete narratives. In the absence of formal education, when students are left to piece together understanding from biased media, peer opinions, or online misinformation, the result is a deeply distorted view of race and history. A 2018 SPLC report showed that only 8% of the U.S. high school seniors could identify slavery as the primary cause of the Civil War. When students believe that slavery was a voluntary arrangement or that racism ended in 1865, it undermines every effort to promote justice and equality today. Silence gives racism plausible deniability that it suggests falsely that if we don't talk about injustice, it must not exist. The impact, it ensures future generations. And with that, And with that, the proposition momentarily rests.
400 years ago. 400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what will be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you would be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? Oh, the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, master said that's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations, we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get the strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight, we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave. Rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
This is something that I wanted to discuss since Emancipation Day, but did you know that Britain only finished paying for slavery in 2015? Yes, 2015 as in 10 years ago. This fact was revealed in a since deleted tweet back on February 9, 2018 by the then Her Majesty's Treasury. In 1833, Britain borrowed 40% of its national budget, £20 million, to finance the Slavery Abolition Act. This act was the official end of British
Ladies and gentlemen, the judges are back, and we have in our possession the winner of this match. The motion before us read, this House believes that academic research and reparation should be prioritized over mass public campaigning. So, what did we get from the teams? Well, from Team Arima North, we get this interesting idea. It was consistent throughout their case. It was first presented by Josiah and then extended throughout their case that, quite frankly, without the research, without the evidence, without the data, we will not be very compelling when we go to the international courts and when we go to these former colonizers and demand what it is we are owed. See, Josiah tells us that what actually happens is that systematic discrimination occurs and that mass campaigning simplifies the atrocities. They don't get into the nuances of the different experiences that different individuals had and different groups of people had, and that's bad. And we don't get through solvency for the nuanced precision of reparations through just mass campaigning and everyone just protesting in the streets. We get that, Josiah says, to a greater extent when we provide research analytical documents that show in great detail exactly what happened. We thought that was good. We thought that idea was expanded upon by Leandra, and we loved how Leandra did it for us. See, Leandra tells us in great, excruciating, and convincing details that we need evidence before we do anything. She talked about the Mau Mau uprising, which was very interesting because both teams claimed the example of Mau Mau as proof of mass campaigning and of research. And so we wanted to know which one really led to the outcome, which one led to the outcome that the Mau Mau indigenous tribe got. Arima Norris proved it to us in a greater extent that what actually happened is that the survivors were campaigning for half a century. But what was told to them? It is unverifiable. It is lost to time. There is no record of the injustices. And it wasn't until a lady, I forget her name, but an archaeologist actually found the archives that were intentionally hidden by the British, proving, yes, proving these atrocities, that they were actually able to go to court and get the money. This, we think, was a very impactful example of how it is that we need to ensure that we have academic research before we get any further. It was consistent throughout the debate. Leandra did the best job of proving that particular case to us, and the judges bought it. We buy that we need academic research before we go into these court systems, and therefore it is of immense importance. But that's not the debate. Debate isn't about whether it's important. The debate is about whether it should be prioritized. And here's an important key piece of context that needs to, Debates happen in the here and in the now at this point in time. So, with that context, what does Manchester High tell us? We have the research. We have it. We have it in droves. We have it in abundance. It's collecting dust on the shelves. They don't deny the importance of the research. They're saying that the research is not what needs to be prioritized right now, because quite frankly, it's been done. 200 years of research has been done. Yes, we hear that coming out in particular from Tahira, right? Jarif brought up the idea. She says that we are continuing research, and it is pointless, that there are grassroots movements that need to be radicalized and mobilized, that the frameworks exist, the political mechanisms exist, the research already exists, and therefore if we take too long to actually mobilize what fundamentally and functionally happening, we heard coming out of the cross-examination, particularly from Kishan, is that individuals are just going to use them. Countries are just going to say, well, we don't have the evidence, we don't have the research, there is not enough research, and it can actually become a tool of delay. We thought that was very interesting. We thought as well that interesting idea that came out of the case of Manchester High was the case of Black Lives Matter. Yes, that there is a litany of research that exists in regards to racism, systematic and structural racism. And it wasn't until individuals got up and raised the streets that we saw some sort of solvency. We saw the solidarity. That is very interesting, right? Now, let's see how the judges ultimately concluded the debate. The judges were convinced by Arima Norris that the research is necessary. The mass movements are important, Arima Norris contends, but they are secondary to push forward what already exists in what needs to exist in the court of law. Because functionally, reparation is a matter of sovereignty and justice, but it is also a matter of legal law. And they say the country is not going to pay until there is enough evidence. We believe you, Arima Norris. We believe you wholeheartedly. Manchester High tells us we have that information. We have it. Therefore, there is no more need for us to delay. We have all of what Arima North is telling us we need. We have it at our disposal. Let us take up our plaques. Let's go storm the Supreme Court. Let's bring justice to those of us who were enslaved and descendants of enslavement. We have everything we need. They're delaying not because of a lack of evidence. They're delaying for many other reasons. And that is why we need mass public campaigning to finally push them over the edge. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the judges weighed the debate. One of these two teams will be advancing to the octofinals of this competition. The team that will be automatically advancing to the octofinals will be Arima Norris. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Manchester High. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Arima Norris. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Manchester High. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Arima Norris. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Manchester High. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Arima Norris. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Manchester High. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Arima Norris. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Manchester High. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Manchester High. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be Manchester High. The team that will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals will be comes to us from the team in opposition, Manchester High School. Congratulations, Manchester High School. We think your strategy of contending that the research already exists, therefore there's no need to prioritize it, is what has won you this debate. Commendations to you, Manchester High. The best debater from this match comes to us actually from Arima North Secondary School. Yes, the team that doesn't win actually had the best debater, and that is their second speaker, Leandra Quintero. Excellent job, Leandra. At this point in time, we invite the schools to open their mics and explain and exchange rather pleasantries in the spirit of sportsmanship.
Well done, Arima North.
Well done, guys.
Well done to you as well.
Congratulations on your win.
Yeah.
Well done. Thank you for being good candidates to us and a good fellow debating team.
Thank you. You as well.
Indeed. The scores ending this round, Arima North Secondary on 268 points to Manchester High School's 272 points. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. But before we go, we want to invite our guest judge, Mrs. Springer Barnett, to share some words.
Thank you. So let me first commend the debaters for the depth, the clarity, and seriousness with which they engaged this debate today. So reparatory justice is not simply an abstract idea. It's about confronting the enduring consequences of slavery and colonialism and determining how societies pursue accountability and repair. So the debate asks us to consider whether research or mass campaigning should be prioritized. So research is essential because it documents the historical harms, it provides evidence of the ongoing impacts, and it builds the intellectual and legal foundation for reparation claims. However, history has shown us that research alone rarely produces political change. Social transformation has always required public mobilization, voices, movements, and sustained pressure that makes justice a political imperative. So today's debate demonstrates that these approaches are not opposites. Research informs the movement and campaigning activates it. Together, they form the foundation of meaningful and sustained reparatory justice. So I want to thank both teams for their debates today and the organizers for contributing to this important conversation. And congratulations to you both.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Springer Barnett. Ladies and gentlemen, only one match remains in round 2 of this competition. Join us in a few moments where we will see Our Lady of Fatima College from Trinidad and Tobago go up against Holy Faith Convent Penal, also from Trinidad and Tobago. The motion reads, this House believes that the reparation movement should prioritize moral righteousness over strategic compromise. Wow, it's a beautifully principled motion. I'll see you at 1 p.m.
Congratulations, both teams.